Hey there, this is Brent Hoodenpyle with another episode of Persuading for Profits. Today, my guest is Mr. Richard Harris from the Harris Consulting Group. Richard, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good, man. Nice to see you, and thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you very much. This is a treat. I'm really looking forward to this one. We are Persuading for Profits, so we are a sponsored and by Radio Update, which is a radio industry blog or a website, and they kind of a resource center for all things radio. And this podcast is about the sales and marketing end of things. So it's
Sure.
any salespeople in general, but it's a real challenge these days with radio, with people getting advertisers with so much competition these days. So just want to have you on and thank you for being here. You are quite an accomplished sales trainer, award-winning. I know you've had some clients that were on your great resume of Visa and Zoom and Salesforce. But who's the man behind the resume? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your life in selling.
Thank you. Very kind words. I'm one of the rare people in sales where I kind of knew I was going to go into sales and business.
Right.
Most people in sales, as I sort of say, are kind of like a dumpster fire of failed careers, or
That's how I got
didn't
there.
realize, the financial reward of sales growing up, and sort of were given that stigma. I was sort of the opposite. Both my parents were in sales, and my first real job was in sales at the Gap, doing retail sales. So
Nice. Okay.
at the mall.
Right.
For those who remember what those are.
You would upsell the matching socks at the end, right?
Absolutely. You even remember the matching socks. You're right. Yeah, we've both been selling since the 1900s, it sounds like. So that I sort of knew that this was what I was going to do. And so I've done everything: inside sales, outside sales. I've been an SDR, I've been an AE, I've been a manager, a director, a sales ops, a VP. Like I've kind of got this nice liberal arts degree of sales.
Nice. Really cool.
And never anticipated I'd go into this training consulting business. The interesting thing is that as a kid, I used to want to be a teacher, and specifically a history teacher. However, I knew there was no money there. And so as my career, went on and I moved into leadership, I always enjoyed training. Like I've always enjoyed watching other people become successful, right? As much as myself, and there's something really rewarding and altruistic about that you're helping someone accomplish, not just their educational goal of learning how to sell, but their financial goals and supporting their family, or helping them get the car they've always wanted, or set their family up for something that they never thought that they could accomplish, from a financial perspective. So there's something super rewarding about that for me. So that's probably the essence of the man behind it. But I could go. You can ask me anything, I'll tell you.
Well,
anything.
I mean, what a cool upbringing though, to have two parents that were in sales. I mean,
yeah.
What kind of selling were they doing?
So my mom started out in radio advertising. Then she moved into cable television advertising a long time ago, and was selling ads on ESPN. And this is when, I've been around this long, but when ESPN first started, it didn't have live sports. All it had was sports news and then the replay of games, right? Like this is before you could get every college football game on your television whenever you wanted, or a professional game, right? So they were doing reruns.
Remember Australian rules football? That was all over ESPN during the day, right?
Yeah. So she was doing that. My dad, his father had started an insurance broker company when my dad was very young. And so my dad took over that business and then sold out to one of the partners and then just kept doing insurance sales. So I was sort of surrounded by business all my life, which I think has been super helpful, right? It gave me a certain level of business acumen. I was exposed to, what it meant to own a share of stock in Texaco, at early ages, and understand that what interest is on a savings account and a dividend. I'm talking, at the age of 5, 6, 7,
Wow.
I was exposed to that because that's just the world that my parents lived in, right? So,
Right.
So I've been very fortunate in that sense that I've sort of grown up with it in my mind.
That is very cool. So, after the gap, I mean, what was your first really,
Real job?
the real job where you're like, okay, this is real sales and this is a real
Yeah.
income potential and everything like that?
Yeah. Good question. So I did inside sales for weekly newspapers. So this is pre-internet, where every Wednesday or Thursday, every city had a newspaper that came out, that was sort of hip, and it was considered alternative, not alternative like today.
Right.
And it's where you found the interesting stories, the different stories that you wouldn't find in a regular newspaper. But it had all the bars and the clubs and the concerts and all that stuff
Right.
going on. And it was sort of the hip, cool thing to do. So that was my first real sales job. And I was selling classified ads in the back, right? Because that's where newspapers made money pre-internet.
Right.
And so I worked for them in Denver, and I worked for them in Cleveland, and I worked for them in San Francisco. If anybody's listening knows the Village Voice in New York, that's the kind of newspaper we're talking about. And, and eventually we merged with the Village Voice at some point. So so that was my first real sales job of cold calling and research and prospecting. And it was old school, right? Like it was, calling out of the yellow pages and calling out of the back of, Rolling Stone magazine and, really different stuff than today.
So, how long? I mean, with parents as salespeople, when you got into the field, because radio sales today, I feel, and seeing your mom's experience with that, it's a tough gig. I think it's always been a tough gig. There's the phone book, there's the people, go out and get them on the radio.
Yeah,
and it you don't make a lot of money overnight. It takes a while to build up your sales book and everything. Watching your parents, how did that impact you? I mean, did you start off with some really great skills, or did you pick things up along the way? I mean, what did they give you to start your sales
That's a good
career?
question. I think through osmosis I had business skills, right? I also knew how to have a conversation, right? Because they were talkers. I'm pretty competitive, so I liked that part of the game, right? I like, there's this interesting question that we used to ask way back when, which was, how much do you like, talking people into doing things, which, was we would use in our interview questions. And it was, it's purposely vague, right? Like it's purposely vague around, well, are you talking about manipulation, or are you talking about talking them into something that's good for them, right? But I've always liked that too. Like I've always been a little bit of an arguer. My mom always said I should be a lawyer, right? That kind of stuff. So I think there were just certain things, and I don't, some of it's my parents. I think some of it's innate in humans, right? The highly hyper competitive people tend to do fairly well in sales. So I think that's where it all sort of came from, right? And so it wasn't foreign to me in the sense of, why would I, it's not like my one parent was a doctor and another was an accountant, so why am I choosing sales, right? Like I was exposed to this, right? I understood what was happening, and there were dinner conversations around deals that closed and how exciting that was, and like that kind of stuff. So it was just sort of, it was just there for me, right? It's kind of like my wife a long time ago used to work in production down in Hollywood, TV commercials and stuff like that, and behind the scenes, and our son is very interested in that, and so he's sort of pursuing that as a passion and potentially as a career. And it's kind of the same thing. I think because he's had some exposure to it through my wife and his mom, that it's not foreign to him. To the same thing, he's also talked about going into sales, like, because he sees that I do it, right? So I think that exposure helps a lot for people.
Yeah, I would guess that as much as learning how to talk to people and the sales techniques, that maybe seeing the way your parents, because you have to have a thick skin, right, to do sales, especially the kind of sales that they were doing. I mean, I assume that was probably something that you took with you into the sales force, that maybe that did that give you a little bit of a head start over everybody
I don't
else?
think so. I think it was, I think, you hear that it's tough, but you don't know till it's tough, right? You hear that you hit a sales slump until you hit a sales slump,
Right.
right? So you can know about certain aspects of it, but until you go through it yourself, it's very different, which I think is life in general. I don't care what career you choose, right? It's, it's one thing for someone, to go in and to be a doctor and go into the practice of heart surgery, be a heart surgeon. It's very different though when that heart surgeon's had 20 years of experience as opposed to the first 2 years where they're quote unquote qualified. They just don't have as much of experience through no fault of their own, right? So I think it's the same in all careers.
Well, very cool. So over time, you've kind of come up with your own kind of system. You've written a book called The Seller's Journey.
Yeah.
Is that a takeoff on the hero's journey? Is that kind of?
No, it's a takeoff on. Everybody talks about the fact that there's this buyer's journey that a buyer goes through. Well, you got to understand the buyer's journey, and in fact, I don't believe there's a buyer's journey. I think there's a buyer's experience through a journey, and that sales and marketing create the journey.
Right.
Right. If you are a customer, and I've had many debates on this, and you decide you want to buy something, right? You decide you're interested. You are either A, looking to change a certain experience, or B, prevent a bad experience from occurring. So even the initial outset is started because of some level of experience.
Right.
And then we've all done it. We've all Googled something, or we all see something on Instagram, and you've immediately backed out of it because it wasn't easy, it was clunky, it wasn't what you wanted, perhaps it wasn't the right thing, right?
Right.
So I think there's this moment where it's really more about the buyer's experience through a seller's journey that we create that matters. And so that's why I called it the seller's journey.
And so what is that journey? Is that a journey with each sale that the seller goes through? Is that?
Yeah, so a seller's journey is to create a repetitive, simple process that takes into account their prospect and customer, right? To understand who they are at the persona level, at the company level, at the pain level, and to be able to assist someone on their quest to find resolution. Right. And they're going, it's a little bit of the yellow brick road, right? Like we build this yellow brick road, right? And there are going to be, different people who are involved, right? The Scarecrow and the Tin Men and all that. Those are part of the buying committee, right? Then you're going to run into the objections and the obstacles, right? The flying monkeys and the Wicked Witch and all these things. And so, that's the simplest analogy of what I think a seller's journey is how do we lay out that path and know that both of those things are going to happen. There's always going to be the monkeys. There's always going to be the Wicked Witch, right? But how do we do it in a way that supports our buyer as they're going down this path? And we build that journey for them. And through that journey, they have an experience.
That's great. Yeah. And so, I guess people don't really take all that into account. I feel that with, the committee aspect of everything, even if there's not an actual committee, there's always somebody whispering in their ear, right?
Oh, yeah. There's always a skeptic. There's always a skeptic. So, so I always tell people, like, it doesn't matter who the decision maker is, right? Like, if I'm trying to sell you, Brent, at the end of my first meeting, I'm not going to say, so who's the real decision maker or budget holder? What I'm going to say is I'm going to say, hey, Brent, look, I know when we get off this call, you're going to go take this back to your team. You're going to get their input. That's generally how it works. Just out of curiosity, who's the most skeptical person on the team, and what are they so often skeptical about in relation to what we've been talking about today?
What a great question. Wow.
Because now Brent's going to tell me who the skeptic is. That may be the decision maker.
Right.
But from Brent's perspective, he's got to win over the skeptic, assuming Brent decides he wants to position Richard to come in and help sell, right? Help solve whatever solution is Brent was talking to me about. So now all of a sudden, I'm trying to give Brent this experience of, I got your back, buddy. Like, I know someone's going to call you out on something, what is it, so I don't make you a ping pong ball, right? So that's a specific way of how I see this.
Is there a specific story you have from your past where that you've uncovered the skeptic, or maybe you didn't know about a skeptic?
All right, I realized this approach of the skeptic versus the decision maker a couple of years ago, right before I wrote the book, and was testing it myself. And
right.
And the most important thing is that it changed the conversation immediately. Because if I say to Brent, so who else is a part of making this decision? Can I be a part of that meeting? Brent knows to clam up. Oh, no, you can't do it. It's internal. But if I say who's the skeptic, Brent knows exactly who that person is, or people,
right,
and knows what they're skeptical about. And so it changes the conversation, it changes the tone of the conversation, and it continues to build trust, right? Like, I always say it's our job to get our prospects and customers to fall in trust with us, not fall in love with us. They could fall in love with the results that we deliver, but I need them to fall in trust with me. And it's that moment where that happens, and you can hear the tone and the conversation shift, and Brent go, oh, that's a good question. And they stop to think, and they go, it's probably this, and there it's our CFO, and here's what they're going to ask. Okay, Brent, great. Would it be helpful if I give you some information around that now so you don't become a ping pong ball? Brent's, of course, going to say yes. But I've done it many times. I did it, General Electric was a client a couple of years ago, and I did it with them. And, that happened. I said, well, who are the skeptics? And they're like, well, just about everybody. And I said, totally fair. I kind of expected that answer, right? It's a big company, right? It's going to be multiple committees, right? Okay, well, but then I could say, well, where do we need to start? Who do we need to start to win over first? So we could prioritize and organize this. Because I know that this conversation isn't going to be, a 1-call close, 2-call close, 3-call close with a company like GE, right? There's multiple hoops to jump through. So if I start to say that tells me the path that we both have to go down. And it helps me prepare. And it helps me turn around and go, okay, Brent, so if we need to start there, I can share this information with you or this information with you. What do you think is the right thing? And I can also say, hey, Brent, assuming you take this back to the committee, right? I don't want to make you look bad. So who are the skeptics, and what are the things they want to know, so that I can maybe give that information to you now, so that now I'm actually turning Brent into my champion of champions, right? Like, that's how you turn someone into your champion.
That is so great. Just that approach, and that one question. Mm-hmm. Before you ask that question, and if you had asked who's the decision maker, they still kind of take the adversary. They're still in an adversarial position. But once you ask that question, they move around to your side of the table, and now you guys are a team.
Yeah, it's the same reaction you get when you say, well, what's the budget, right? Everybody knows to clam up on what's the budget. Everybody knows to clam up on who's the decision maker. So there are different ways you can change the conversation to make it a better experience for both of us, right? It's not even about making my prospect have a better experience. It's about me having a better experience, and
right, absolutely, yeah.
Making my job as easy as possible, right? So anyway, so that's sort of the approach to it.
Now you lay out, you have an acronym, NEAT, in the book.
Yep.
So it stands for, if I'm right, it's need, economic. Impact,
right?
Impact, access to what's the A is access to
authority. So it's need, economic impact, access to authority, and timeline, right? And essentially those are the things. Not in order, no. So the whole thing is that you don't always have to go in order. It's not unusual that you do. We talk about the need. Okay, what is it? Well, what's the economic impact of that need? Meaning, what happens if you do this or don't do this? What's it costing you now? What could you accomplish better if you solve this problem, right? Economic impact. Access to authority is all about that skeptic question, right? Like, generally speaking, unless you're in a 1-call close, you're not even talking to the right authority person. We already know that they're going to have to go back to get approval from somebody. They're going to have to go and, get the team opinion. So it's about what level of access to authority does this person I'm talking to have? And then timeline is timeline, right? And, look, I've said this for a long time, that nothing has changed in sales since Mesopotamia, right? There's nothing earth-shattering, right? We've all tweaked things to be certain things. There's BANT and MEDIC and MEDPIC and, SPIN and all these great sales approaches.
Right.
I just needed to differentiate myself, and that's how I came up with it. Like, it was no let me come up with this really cool thing. It just sort of, I figured it out, so to speak. You know what I mean?
I think that's...
And it felt really relevant, and people tell me it's relevant.
That's really good. I think a lot of times, especially probably in radio sales, it's like, hey, we'll get these guys in there and we'll churn through them and they'll probably burn out in 2 weeks or a month or whatever anyway, but maybe we'll get a client out of them, or something like that. I think it's just such a hard gig. Radio sales, as an account executive, you're going out and looking for new business, and you're maybe looking for new business from people who have never even thought of advertising on the radio.
Yeah.
And part of the challenge, I think, these days is there is a mindset of, I can spend my money on digitally. I can see how many clicks I get. I can see how many, I can see all these metrics about it. And radio's a little fuzzier, it's a longer commitment, and so your job is to really figure out, you could probably assume every business wants new clients and things like that. But in the prospecting phase, what does your system look like when you're going out there? And are you looking to uncover need, or are you also trying to look and expose a need of like, hey, you're doing this, you're getting this, but you could also be here? How much of that do you see is the account executive's, the salesperson's role?
Well, I think it's a multifaceted role. It's a multi-prong approach, right? So, marketing helps even in radio sales. They need to promote that you can do radio sales, but you also need product managers to explain, the right type of radio sales. Like I know enough about radio sales in terms of, talk about drive time and talk about the number of listeners, and you've got to know who's listening based on the station. A jazz station is a different, audience than a pop station, right? And understanding that, and also then understanding, what is the goal of the business, right? Like, sure, you could walk into any restaurant and the goal is for them to have more business, right? The other question though is part of their goal to improve their brand, which then improves more business? Is part of their goal to be family friendly, which then improves business, right? And figuring out what kind of things make that particular, again, in this instance, a restaurant, unique, right? And being able to do that, and then being able to explain how radio can fit in to that approach, right? To your point, back to the digital side of things, right? Like, lots of businesses have moved to, online advertising, right? SEO, search engine optimization, search engine marketing with clicks and stuff like that. But the question then is, the business needs to know where their fish are and fish where their fish are, right? If does a restaurant need to pay for ads on Google? I don't know. Do they need to pay for ads on Yelp? Maybe, right? Like that might be the right, you got to sort of figure it out. But then, how does radio enhance that, right? How do you say in radio, look, we've got, over 220 4-star or 5-star reviews on Yelp. Okay, that one enhances the other, right? So that you're trying to capture them in multi-pronged approaches. So yes, it falls upon the sales rep, but also falls upon the leadership and the manager or the director of the sales team to teach them how to do those things, to coach them how to do those things. And it falls upon the executive leadership to make sure those managers have what they need to empower their salespeople. So it's not just the salesperson, in my opinion. I think ultimately it comes down to the salesperson. The salesperson has to do the job, and there are lots of places we've all been where you don't get that support from leadership.
Right.
And therefore you are going to have to do it all on your own. And I think it's going to be a real rude awakening for the Gen Zs coming into the world, and even the next Gen Alphas, of like, oh, this is what it means to figure it out on your own, kind of stuff.
Yeah,
they're not used to having bad bosses.
Right. And a lot of times the bosses may not even know themselves. It's not that they're bad people, or they just haven't been trained themselves too.
Right.
So
I don't buy into that anymore, though. I think for me as a Gen Xer, I was probably that way because I only understood what I was taught, and I didn't have enough gumption to go find it at the library, because that's where I'd have to go get it. Right. As opposed to today, it's like, oh, I want to figure out how to do objection handling. Right. Okay. Right. Well, I can Google that. Oh, I want to be a better sales manager when my reps are underperforming. I can go get that kind of research. So, and the same is for a sales rep. At this point, there's no reason someone can't get better at their craft and blame leadership entirely. Yes, you can blame it because they don't have a culture of that learning and education. However, it now does fall upon you, and you actually can do something about it. And that's the best part of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's help some people get better at their craft here right now. Question for you. So one of the things, a salesperson walks in and they're talking to a new business owner, and I'm from so-and-so radio station, and immediately, the business owner in their head, this is the radio guy, he's here to try and sell me something.
Yep.
You said, I think somewhere along the way, that you have to earn the right to ask questions. So how does that salesperson go from that position to earning the right to ask questions and getting some trust, and not from almost a defensive position to a place of collaboration?
So, give me a little more context. Am I walking in off the street cold calling, or have I set an appointment with this person?
Let's say you saw them at a Chamber of Commerce thing, and like, hey, yeah, come by and see me. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So not completely cold.
Not completely cold. Okay. So, I would come in and I would say, and you can role play this with me. It's called a respect contract. And I would say, hey, Brent, it was really great seeing you at the Chamber of Commerce thing. And, I know you said I could come by and talk to you. And, I'd love to take, 15 or 20 minutes and just ask you some questions about your approach to business these days. Is that all right with you?
Yeah. I'll just gonna be honest with you up front. We probably not looking to do radio advertising.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I'm open, sure.
Sure. And just so you know, I get it. Like, in fact, today I don't even know that we need to talk about radio advertising. I just want to understand your business a little bit. And look, if you decide you want to do some business, great. That's awesome. And by the way, ask questions. And I know I'm going to ask you some questions just so I can understand your business. And if you feel like we're not going to do business, say so. You're not going to tell me. I don't need to come knocking on your door every week, Brent. Like, that's, I don't need to be that type of salesperson. So, so if you feel like it's never going to be a fit after we chat a little bit, just say so. You won't offend me. Is that fair?
That's fair. That's really good,
Great.
Right?
Yeah. So Brent, just out of curiosity, what's going on with your business these days? Like, regardless of whether you advertise with me or anybody else, like, is business good? It can always be better. What would better look like? Help me understand what would even make you even consider doing anything, whether it's me or some other form of advertising.
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I just wish it was a little bit more steady. It could always probably be better. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna pause this right there. So that's a respect contract, right? So
that's really
I
good.
confirmed time. I confirmed the goals of the call, which is let's just have a conversation, not can we talk about advertising. I confirmed there'd be this agenda that I'm going to ask you questions and you're going to ask me questions, and then you're going to decide, or I'm going to decide it's just not a good fit, right? And so the goal there is to just sort of reduce this tension, right? Like, I walked in the door and the first thing Brent said was, no, I'm not buying anything.
Right.
I'm not selling you anything. I'm just trying to understand. And I was very conscious to say, I just want to understand your business. I want to understand what's happening. So
that's good.
So I stuck to this respect contract. And then I created a social contract with you that said, hey, if you decide you don't want to do this, Brent, just tell me. I don't need to come around. And you literally said, that's fair.
Right.
Which is great. That's all I want. I just want to have a moment for a fair conversation.
Right.
And then I transitioned into discovery, what's going on? Like, I think I know what's going on. Everybody kind of wants business, but what's happening in your business, Brent?
Right.
And you started to go down this path of, well, it could always be a little busier. And, I would have followed up with, well, what does that look like? Is it busier on the weekends, busier on certain days? Is it busier with, I would have just kept probing to understand more about it. So in that essence of a respect contract, the first 2 minutes, I'm earning the right to ask questions because I've told them that I'm going to ask questions. And I've also given them an out, which is just tell me, which is opposite of what we've ever been taught. We've always don't ever give them an out. It's like, yeah, give them an out. Nothing will exhaust the spirit and will of a salesperson than chasing a maybe. Like, give them the opportunity to say no.
Right.
Because I know that, I'll stop in a second, but I know that in the real world of business and sales and advertising, Brent's going to tell me that, I'm not going to do anything, but it doesn't mean I can't come back in 2 months and just say, hey, Brent, has business picked up? Has this come up? Or, hey, I saw you did this. Congratulations. Or, do you have a special coming up for Mother's Day? Are you doing something around that for the family, right, that you would want to promote? Like, even though it's, it's not this like, oh, it's not no forever. It's not no right. It means no, not right now. Sure, but I'm trying to do it in a friendly way that respects what Brent has said, which is I don't want to buy any advertising.
No, that is really good. And I think I feel today, especially with the younger generation, and maybe it's always been this way, that people are terrified from the sales standpoint of asking questions. I feel that a lot of salespeople today are good customer service people.
Yes.
They're good at product knowledge. They're really good at product knowledge. They have all the answers, but, and they kind of get abused, Great, thanks for all the help. Pat you on the head, and we'll call you. And so, is that? I mean, that sounds like a system-wide problem, especially if you're the sales manager of an organization. You don't want that to happen, but it seems kind of generational too. It's like that's kind of just where we are.
I think it's been around forever, right? It's you could also call it call reluctance.
Okay.
Right? If it was cold calling. Sure. And there are a couple of fears. So the first fear is they feel like they're intruding on someone or asking them deep personal questions.
Right.
And that the fear is because they haven't earned the right to ask that question.
Oh, that's so good.
Right?
Yes.
Like that's for me, that's the psychology of this. Like I don't,
Yes.
You have to pay somebody to do a bunch of research to tell me if I'm right or wrong. But that's where I think it comes from. And I think to your point, generationally, because that's how it's been handed down to us over the generations. Right? There's 4,000.
Right.
There's 4,000 schools, universities in the U.S., give or take. Right? Maybe 400 have a degree in sales.
Right.
You didn't go to school to learn this. It didn't exist. It was marketing. Nobody taught you how to ask questions and earn the right to ask questions and all those kind of things. So that to me is where that gap is. And I think it's existed everywhere. Now, when you and I were growing up, if you went to IBM or Xerox or, some big corporate company, that kind of stuff did exist, right? Sales training, sales enablement existed. But for most people who start in sales, who don't go to a big company, they're just learning what their bosses learned, who learned what their bosses taught them, who learned what their bosses taught them, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you have those repetitive things of like, don't take no for an answer, and don't give them an out, or ask them if you can be a part of that meeting, even though you're never going to be a part of that meeting. Like all that same old BS that we all used to do and teach. Like I used to teach that stuff too because that's all I knew.
Right.
That generational approach hasn't worked, right? It's the hand-me-down sales approach, right? That's what we got, and it's now shifted.
How do you know when you've earned the right to ask the tough questions? Are there test questions that you send out, kind of trial balloons, or how do you know when you're there?
That's a really good question, right? Because to a certain extent, the respect contract says I can start asking you questions, and I say,
right.
okay, so Brent, what made you want to have this conversation today? Okay, and we start digging in, right? But there is this other part, like even for me, it's like, well, the team's not hitting goal, right? Maybe that's the answer that I get, and I go, okay, well, what was the goal and how much did you miss by?
Right.
Now here's Brent teeing this up for me to ask that question. That's still a fairly intrusive question.
Sure.
Right? I'm getting personal, right?
Right.
Because money is personal. It's emotional.
Yes.
And so part of it is understanding that, hey, earning the right to ask the question helps, but that doesn't always make it easy to ask the question. That comes from time and experience.
Right.
Right? And you have to be willing to go there. And look, I'm the first person to say, I teach this, I preach this, and I can still get off a sales call and go, you know what? I chickened out on that question.
Yeah.
Right?
It's tough.
And you kind of have to determine, my opinion is, you determine what are the chicken out questions that you really should be asking. Right? It could be things like, okay, how many, you missed your goal. Okay, by how much? What was the goal? Was the goal even realistic in your opinion? How many people missed the goal? Is anybody getting fired from missing the goal? Might you be on the line for missing the goal? Like from a sales training perspective, right? This is my approach. Those are all very personal questions. So you kind of have to know them, study them, and practice them, like literally out loud. Right. Because it's uncomfortable to ask a personal question.
Right.
It really is. You're kind of asking someone like, so what happened? Why did the marriage fail?
What was your role in this?
Yeah, what was your role in this problem, right? So, anyway, you've gotten there by doing this respect contract. You still have to practice the other part.
Right.
And it's important to know those things. And that's why I also think having a formal process of the order of operations that a salesperson needs to follow and the types of questions you should have and have it mapped out pretty tightly is really important, right? Tom Brady didn't walk onto the field with nothing planned.
No.
Right? No quarterback does that. Right? There is a plan. The first 10 or 15 plays are often scripted to see what's going to happen, and you make the adjustments accordingly. There's no difference in that than in a sales pitch. The people who say they wing it, first of all, they're liars. They don't wing it. They say the same thing over and over in the same spot all the time.
Right.
10% might be different, but 90% is the exact same thing.
Right. Yeah, and I think and it's easier said than done, but if salespeople would take more of a experimental, if you talk to enough people, if you're talking to people all day long, you can try different things, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you have enough people to throw away, right, I guess, you can try, well, I tried that here, that didn't work, maybe I should have said that this way. But having an established process, when you train in organizations, is that the biggest thing that you see, that everybody's kind of off doing their own thing? I mean, is that the thing that if
it's one of the most common?
Yeah. Okay.
And usually when people are talking to me, they're coming because they have no standardized process, right? And to your point, everybody's even you have a whole bunch of veterans and a whole bunch of newbies, but everybody's doing it their own way, right? So they're looking for a common language, right? That's one reason, like you described. Others have a full process. They just want to teach them the art of discovery in relation to the process they built, right? They've got the stages built, right? They already know that the stages of a sale is this, 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 and this. And generally speaking, this is the order of the conversation. And here's when you ask most questions, and here's where you do a demo, and then here's where you talk about commercial terms. There's a certain flow there, right? Where they often are wanting help is just getting their reps to ask those tougher questions and getting comfortable asking those tougher questions.
The art of discovery, that's a great way to put it, too. Yeah. I mean, because you see a lot of salespeople that don't want to do that at all. They just want to do on the presentation end. And
it's show up and throw up.
Right. And I would say maybe the majority, right? I mean, just even knowing that there is an art of discovery will change your life if you've never even heard that before.
Yeah.
So your art of discovery, which you teach very well, does that fit into any sales? If you're doing gap selling, if they're doing Sandler, if they're doing whatever.
Yeah. So the thing I say about NEAT is, for some people it's a process, for some it's a methodology, and for some it's a philosophy, and it depends on where that organization is in their sales maturity. That doesn't mean a big company like GE couldn't change, right? In fact, that's why they came to me. But for some, it's a bolt-on. Like, I'm not a rip and replace guy. I don't go in and tell people, oh, you've got Medic, you need to rip that out and do it Richard's way and do neat selling.
Right.
If Medic's not working, it's not working for generally one of two reasons. One, it's too complex for a smaller sale, like a smaller 3 to 4 call close transactional sale. Medic is too complex. You don't need that much in there, right? The other reason Medic might fail is because nobody's been coaching to it in the first place. So ripping and replacing isn't going to help if nobody's coaching to the new thing. Right. And the biggest thing I see is that, new VPs of sales, new CROs come in and they want to rip and replace the sales process. And I'm like, because they want to prove that they're doing something. And I'm like, that's not going to really help you. Changing shit in the CRM isn't necessarily going to make you better.
Right.
Now, you might need to track things differently, but teaching your team how to ask questions, that's what's going to affect everything. Because long time ago, before you could come in and rip and replace a sales process, all you had was just teaching your reps how to do it. There was no CRM. It didn't exist.
Right.
So it's a crutch.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing that people use either the CRM as a crutch or don't use it at all. I mean, how important is follow-up in sales? What do you teach on that? What is your philosophy on that?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of it. You need to stay on top of things, right? Assuming you get to the end, like for me, at a first call, we get to the end and I do that skeptic thing and I go, great, so Brent, you're going to have this meeting next week. You know what, should we go ahead and put time on the calendar in 2 weeks because it's a whole lot easier to reschedule something than to schedule something? Or is this really a, hey, don't call me, Richard, we'll call you?
Yeah.
I literally give them the out.
That's great. Yeah.
And determine that next steps. And now, let's say Brent says, well, actually, yeah, don't call us, we'll call you. And I'll be like, great, Brent, if I don't hear from you in 2 weeks, is it okay for me to even just email you just to see what's going on, just to make sure things don't slip through the cracks? 9 times out of 10, Brent will say, yeah, go ahead and do that. That would be helpful. Right. And the 1 time out of 10, I'm glad Brent tells me not to do that. Because I don't need to go chase him. He's telling me he's not interested. Now, I might need to go learn what I messed up if I messed up something.
Right, okay.
But, so always confirming next steps is the most important thing. And even if they don't have a next step, or you don't say that there's one, it's okay to connect with them. Now, what I don't want people to do, I learned this from John Barrows, I don't want people sending emails that says reaching out, touching base, checking in, circling back. Stop saying that, because you sound like every other salesperson. You literally type into the email and you say, hey, the purpose of this conversation, Brent, is to get your feedback from the internal conversation you had with your team. Can you let me know what next steps look like? If you can't
very open-ended. Yeah.
And it's very direct, because that's what you want to know.
Right,
so often, back to that fear thing we were talking about, we often will say, I'm just following up to see where things are. Well, you don't really want to know where things are. You really want to know what happened in that conversation with Brent's team. So I might as well just ask for what I want and get a real answer.
Right.
I still might get ghosted, but at least I was direct and I didn't sound like everybody else. So stop saying reaching out, following up, checking in, touching base, all that kind of stuff.
That is a great point. That is really good. Do you ascribe to the philosophy that if you see something that pertains to them, you will send them, like, hey, just saw this, thought of you, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's always, even in prospecting, even if I'm, I've got a 10-touch sequence or cadence to try and set my first meeting, my third or fourth message to them isn't about a meeting. It might be like, hey, I saw this article, I thought you might like it, hope all's well. Like, I'm not even asking for anything. I'm just trying to show them that I know them, Right. So nothing bad happens when you do that. What person in the world, if someone sent me a message that said, "Hey, Richard, I see you do this surf and sales thing. I saw this really cool article. Right? I thought you might like it." How many people in the world are going to turn around and go, "Why would you do that to me? Don't contact me again"? A handful might. I might actually be one of them because I can smell it, right? Like I know what's going on, right? I can smell the pitch. But most people, if anything, they're just going to ignore it.
Yeah. So people trust you when they feel, true or false, people trust you when they feel that you know and understand them. Is that what you're trying to convey to them in your questions and in your process?
I think true-ish. I think people trust you when you show that you're curious to learn about them.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? Like every human being wants to be seen, heard, and understood. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, that's when you build trust. Now, that doesn't mean I shouldn't know about my prospects. Right? Mm-hmm. It's one thing for me to know that, my CRO, they might have missed goal, they're behind on quota, they didn't hit last year, they're under the gun, but I don't need to go in and preaching that.
Right.
I want to go in and just sort of kind of back to that transition statement from the respect contract of, Brent, tell me what brought you here. Right. And here's the real world application. People will say, well, we need some help with prospecting training for our sales team. And I'll go, okay, Brent, so I know what prospecting means. Like I got it, right? That's my job. I should know that. However, Brent, I don't know what that means to you and your organization. When you say prospecting, do you mean cold email, subject line, body? Do you mean cold calling? Do you mean building a sequence or a cadence? So yes, I know. So I am building some trust to say, hey, I know what you're talking about.
Right.
But I need to know what's really specific at Brent Co. Because, Brent Co. may have never done cold calling. And he wants to talk about cold calling when he says prospecting. Or they've only done cold calling and never done LinkedIn. So they want to learn about that. So so I'm trying to show Brent that I see him, I hear him, and I'm seeking to understand him so that I can then talk about where I might be able to help.
Interesting. That is very good. Yeah, I knew I worked at a long time ago. I worked at a golf shop, and the two guys that owned it had been sales guys. They made so much money they opened a golf shop. That was their passion, And I remember one time they asked me how my golf game was or something, and I just remember answering them, and they were listening so intently it almost made me uncomfortable. I mean, they were really good at what you said about being genuinely curious. And I think that so few people get that these days, even they'll have a conversation with their friend or somebody and they get distracted in the middle of the conversation while you're saying something. So when that is such a huge point that when you can be that curiosity plus knowing, just wanting to know more and wanting to understand them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do an exercise on active listening, and the key to active listening is listening with intention and purpose to understand the other person's perspective.
Oh, that's really good.
Right? Which, particularly like a Brene Brown, that's kind of the definition of empathy.
Right.
I think, how do you become empathetic? Well, you have to first listen with intent and purpose to understand their perspective, not to judge them on their perspective and interrupt their perspective, which it's hard for us to do, right?
It's very hard. Yes. So a couple of things. Thank you for taking the time to do this. This has been great.
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed this, and I think our listeners are getting a lot out of this as well. We've talked about the sales process. What is the sales process? What's the basic sales process? If somebody's out there, they got a new accountant job.
Yeah.
What do they need to do to add some structure to their cold calling or their talking to prospects? What's the sales process look like?
Well, you've asked me a couple. So here's the basic sales process as I've seen it since the beginning of time, right? First, you have suspects. Those are people you think fall within your addressable market. Then you have prospects. You find those prospects by going after the suspects to see who are the right ones to go after. Right. Then you're going into qualification, meaning now I found the right people. Let me confirm that they're the right people for me and that I'm the right person for them or the right service for them, right? It's qualification. Then you go into discovery, which is to really deeply understand their pains and challenges. And that includes how they make decisions and all those kind of pieces, right? And looking for use cases and case studies that relate to the challenges they have based on the services you offer, right? So you have suspect, prospect, qualification, discovery. Then you go into selection mode, right? That might be when you start to do demos, right? When you start talking about the competition, right? When you start talking about their deeper decision-making process, who really is going to be the deeper skeptics, and you start having additional conversations with additional team members. So you have the selection mode. That's where you find out if you're even being shortlisted. Right? Then you're going into negotiation mode. Right now we're talking about commercial terms, which can include everything from pricing to deliverables to potential outcomes to special features or requests. Right, and that's where the proposal is sent. Is in negotiation, and then you're in the closing mode. So it's suspect, prospect, qualifying, discovery, selection, negotiation, and closing. That's every sales process I've ever seen.
Right.
Things like demo is not a stage of a sales process. Proposal is not the stage of a sales process. Those are things you do within those other elements of a sales process.
That is great. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, a lot of people. That's great information right there, because that usually those are the points people run to. I'm at the demo. Can I show you this? Here's the proposal, and then everything else is left aside. No discovery. No, you don't know who's on the committee. You're flying blind and just hoping for the best. And that's really good. And that's why people feel like they're being sold. That's why they don't like salespeople.
Yes.
They're not taking the time to find out about them and find
they're
out.
Not being seen, heard, or understood.
That is so good. That is really, really good. Well, we're just sneaking up on an hour. That's what they say on radio, right? Sneaking up on 11 o'clock. So any parting words for? I've enjoyed this. Thank you so much again for coming on. Any parting words for all the?
No, thank you very much. I'm always happy to help people. I take a ton of calls of like, hey, Richard, I'm stuck on this deal. What would you do or say? Get a hold of me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Richard Harris. I'm the one with the little trademark emoji by my name, and I'm also super crazy. 415-596-9149, 415-596-9149. That's my real cell phone number. I know it's real. I know it's real because my kids don't respond when I call for them. Two teenage boys. So and text me to let me know that you heard me on the show with Brent before you call, or if you just want to text a question. But I'm always happy to put some karma out in the world.
That's so great. Thank you so much. And you have an AI, Richard, on your website too, right?
Yeah, I took all my knowledge, right, both pages, right, front and back, and I uploaded it into a bot, and people can go get free advice.
That is one of the coolest things I've seen too, and that's at Richard Harris, or it's at Harris Consulting Group. What's that at?
Yeah, theharrisconsultinggroup.com. Yeah,
theharrisconsultinggroup.com. Awesome. Thank you again so much for coming on the call. Hope to have you on again sometime, and hopefully people reach out to you.
Absolutely.
That's another episode of Persuading for Profits. Thank you guys. We'll see you next time.